Hello, everybody. I'm Nicholas Coley with Sweet Georgia Sports, and today we are bringing you a college football preview in which we will cover UGA, Georgia Tech, Georgia Southern, and Georgia's most popular college football team, Georgia State. And joining me today is AJ Merritt, Alex Driscoll, and Blake Henderson. And one thing everybody loves about college football is an underrated player or an underdog. So, AJ, give me your underrated player for UGA.
Well, Nick, there is one player for UGA that I feel like does not get enough attention, and that guy is Raquan Smith. He is our starting Mike linebacker, as you would say. And not many people know this, but Pro Football Focus actually graded him as the second best linebacker in the SEC, behind only Reuben Foster. And anybody who watches SEC football knows how great Reuben Foster was for Alabama, because obviously he was a first round draft pick in this past draft. I do think Raquan Smith is one of the anchors of the defense. He's a rising junior, so he's becoming a leader on that defense. He ranked in the top 10 in the SEC for solo tackles and total tackles, as well as top 5 in forced fumbles. So I definitely think he can only get better, even though, like I said, he was graded as the second best linebacker.
Well, one guy I was looking at, AJ, is tight end Jed Blazevich. Now, I know everybody's on the Isaac Nada train, which no doubt he is a great tight end, but you also got to remember the dude he's sharing duties with, who is Jed Blazevich. Blazevich in 2014 and 2015 both had seasons with above 130 yards. In 2016, he only had 69 yards, but that's, of course, because he shared duties with Isaac Nada. But I still think in 2017, he's going to bounce back and have a fantastic year as Georgia's tight end.
And one thing I want to put in there, because you can look at the stat line and say, well, Georgia doesn't have very good tight ends. I mean, Jet Blazevich was a top-rated tight end coming out of high school, and he started as a true freshman for UGA, I believe, in 2014. He is not a bad tight end by any means. And I just think that our tight ends have been underutilized in the past few years. And now that we've got a guy like Isaac Nada, I think we can finally open up the middle of the field and really get him and Blazevich some touches.
All right, so those are their underrated players for UGA, and now they're going to talk about their expectations for UGA as a whole this season. So, AJ, you can start it off.
Well, Nick, to just give a brief overview of how I feel about the Dogs this year, I have not been this excited for Georgia football in a while. I think the last time I was this excited was probably 2012 when we infamously lost that SEC championship to Alabama. I do want to pull up some stat lines real quick because, of course, where there is excitement, there is also some doubt as well. Because last year, Jim Chaney, first-year offensive coordinator, he comes in from Pittsburgh, I believe, to kind of balance the offense, develop Jacob Eason a little more because he's been known to develop quarterbacks. But last year, Georgia finished 11th in the SEC in total offense. And I definitely think that's something that can improve. You look at our weaknesses, such as the offensive line, I definitely think that can improve, although I'd have to see it with my own eyes. And I know I'm getting into specifics really fast, but I just want to point some stuff out. And one thing that Kirby Smart mentioned a few days ago, actually, was the special teams. I believe it was 92-9 the game. They asked him, what's the biggest concern as of right now? And he said special teams. And that does give me a little hope for the offensive line, because obviously if the O-line was that bad, it would have been the first thing he would have thought of. So I definitely have a little more hope, but at the same time, special teams is definitely something you can't launder at. Mark Richt was known for having terrible special teams units. In terms of a win-loss record, I think 9-3 or 10-2 would definitely be a solid record for them, and definitely a big step up from Kirby's first year.
Well, my opinion on Georgia may be a little less excitement compared to AJ. I still do have some doubt because we do have a very inexperienced coaching staff. Our offensive line is very thin. It's very unproven. I'd like to say that last year Eason was kind of like Matthew Stafford a couple years ago with the Lions. He was a great quarterback, but he didn't have enough time to make any plays. The defensive line would just overrun the offensive line in a matter of seconds and just try to get to him. But where we do stand strong is our defensive line. Just our defense in general is just amazing. We do have a lot of size and athleticism, just like Lorenzo Carter and Raquan Smith. But I do think we'll definitely maybe make the SEC championship is the highest we can do. But Florida is going to be very good this year. So I'd say I put us about 7-4.
I do want to point out,
7-5. Sorry.
I do want to point out that Georgia returns more starters than any other team in the SEC. So that's also something to think about. We're returning 17 starters from last year's team, and that's not even including the fact that 3 of those lost starters were offensive linemen. So that gives me some optimism. But like you just said, the offensive line definitely is very thin, despite getting some really solid guys in recruiting. That's another thing I want to talk about is recruiting, because the last 4 years we have really taken up a notch in terms of recruiting. We finished inside the top 10 for 4 straight years. Doesn't look like we'll do it for a 6th year because the 2018 class is looking kind of down. However, the 2019 class currently ranks 3rd in the nation. So I think recruiting is another thing. That gives us some depth, but like you just said, the offensive line is super thin. So it's really hard to tell on paper right now.
Alex Driscoll, I want to get an outsider's perspective since you're an Auburn fan. What is your opinion on UGA this year?
Oh man, my opinion on UGA, it's like with y'all. I view more toward AJ's side a little bit. I agree that the defense is the backbone and the anchor of the whole team. I mean, because the guys up front like Trent Thompson and Lorenzo Carter and Raekwon Smith, I mean, those are your cowbells, those are your homeboys that are going to go and make plays and hit people in the mouth, which you need to in the SEC because it is a more defensive league, even though gears have started shifting to the SEC, becoming a bit more offensive. But also for UGA, I think the biggest question mark is the offensive line. Like you said, Blake, they're extremely thin, kind of inexperienced and kind of raw. Also, for me, as an Auburn fan and just as a football fan in general, just following the SEC, I'm really looking forward to see how Jim Chaney utilizes a passing game and if he can diversify it more, because you really don't have a true number one out wide for UGA. You have a bunch of number twos that can do a variety of different things, but you don't have like that true number one that say UGA had when AJ Green was there, or when Alabama had Amari Cooper a couple of years ago. You don't have that true number one. You just have a bunch of number twos that on any given day can be a number one, but because they can do a couple of different things. But also with Jacob Eason, I mean, he's a top 3 SEC quarterback in my mind. And I forgot if at media days he made any of the SEC any of the all SEC teams. I'm pretty sure he did, but I think coming in with him being the top freshman quarterback, when we saw a lot of freshman quarterbacks break out last year in the SEC with like guys at Ole Miss with Shea Patterson and out at Carolina with Jake Bentley, he was the top guy as a freshman as a quarterback in the SEC. And the thing for me last year with Jacob Eason, it looked like he was more excited to be the quarterback at UGA instead of the quarterback for UGA. And what I mean by that is he kind of came in a little bit cocky. Because very well so. He was probably the top quarterback recruit in all the nation last year as a freshman. But he just needs to develop more game management skills, which is imperative when you play in the SEC, because if you get behind, it's very, very hard to claw back into games, especially with how the SEC's, again, centered around defense with like Alabama and Florida and all those teams that are centered around defense. It's very, very hard if you get yourself down and come back. So, and also, I don't think Jim Chaney's the answer at offensive coordinator. I think his predecessor at Pitt, Matt Canada, would have been a better option, but of course Matt Canada took the job at LSU. But going forward for UGA in 2017, I think they'll win the SEC East, and I think they'll probably match up with Auburn. They'll have a rematch with Auburn in Atlanta for the SEC championship. I don't have a pick for the SEC champion right now, but I think 10-2, 11-1 is a very realistic record for UGA this year in 2017.
All right, and Alex, since you were talking about Jacob Eason, we were going to talk about him a little bit later, but since you brought him up, I think we can do that right now. I've always had my personal opinion on Jacob Eason, but one thing I did notice when watching him last year is he does have a big arm, very powerful. I mean, everybody saw that throw against Tennessee, but one thing that always bothered me about Jacob Eason was he didn't seem to have a lot of control of his arm. Sometimes he was throwing errant throws, and we saw him throw some pretty bad interceptions last year. Interceptions that good QBs just they don't throw interceptions like that. And he also didn't look very mobile in the pocket, which when you have a porous offensive line like UGA did, you need to be able to move around a little bit. And that's something that you can always work on. That can always be coached up. But Eason, he's obviously very talented, right? He was one of the top quarterback prospects in his class. So we all know the talent is there. I think with Eason, one thing that hurt him was his offensive coordinator. I thought the offense was very vanilla. It didn't take advantage of his talents or the talents of people around him, especially when you were considering his wide receivers weren't all that great. Subpar, some of them, guys like Reggie Davis were okay, but not anything special. What I would like to see Eason improve on is control of his arm, making smarter decisions with the ball, not trying to force things, which I know quarterbacks love to do. Sometimes the play isn't there and you can't make the play. Don't try to make that play. Sometimes you need to take the sack or throw the ball out of bounds, which is something veteran QBs do, and I imagine Jacob Eason will start to do as he grows in this offense. And I would also like to see Eason improve his pocket mobility. And I also think Kirby needs to get rid of Jim Chaney after this year if he truly wants Eason to reach his full potential, because I don't think Chaney is that guy to help him get there. But AJ, can you give me an opinion on Eason, please?
Well, I differ in your opinion on him. I compared this situation to that of Matt Ryan and Kyle Shanahan after the 2015 season, because we were all saying fire Shanahan because the offense just didn't perform like we wanted it to down the stretch. And I kind of compare that to what Jacob Eason and Jim Chaney are going through. Yes, the offense wasn't great. Like I said before, it finished near the bottom of the SEC. However, you got to give Chaney some time. And Kyle Shanahan proved this. It takes more than 1 year to really implement a scheme and to really showcase your knowledge on football, I guess you could say. I think you got to give him 1 more year, but if there isn't any progress, then sure, get rid of him. However, you just have to consider the development of Eason as well. I feel like if you were to change coordinators midway through his college career, that could kind of mess with him. But at the same time, you never know. It depends on who would replace him. I think it's a little early to talk about this. I really just think we need to see what happens this season. That's my take. I think Eason's a very talented quarterback, but like you guys have mentioned, the coaching staff is also very young as well.
And to piggyback off of that, I've always thought Eason was talented, even though I've always had outrageous takes about him that you guys know of. I'm always usually joking or exaggerating my opinion, but as you said, sometimes the offense, it takes a year to get everything going. It's just my issue with UGA, and I did watch them for the most part last year. I just never saw the flashes I wanted to see out of the offense as a whole. I just thought all year they underperformed majorly. And you did mention Kyle Shanahan and the Falcons, but with the Falcons, we did see a lot of flashes during that first year with Shanahan and the Falcons offense. It just wasn't consistent. To me, I thought the offense was consistently bad all year. But Blake, do you have anything to add?
I wanted to compare Georgia's offense to, the Falcons' offense also, in a way that the Falcons' run game is phenomenal. They have, Freeman, who is amazing, and as well as Coleman. I felt like last year Nick Chubb and Sony Michel majorly underperformed compared to what they're supposed to do. So I felt like it was even more on the shoulders of Jacob Eason, that he had to learn how to throw the ball in a college environment very fast. And I feel like that may have messed up his game a little bit. I feel like he should have kind of been eased into that role instead of just put straight into it like that. But I feel like this year he will improve a lot, and I think junior, senior year, if he decides to stay that long, he will be one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC, maybe even all of college football.
Well, I will say I agree with the fact that Jacob Eason had to kind of rush his way into this to be a starting quarterback. You know, that kind of messed up his mental game a little bit. Although I disagree with the fact that Sony and Nick Chubb underperformed this year. Nick Chubb was a 1,200-yard rusher this past year and averaged 5 yards a carry. And we consider that a down year because of our personal expectations for him or for what he did his freshman year. What he did his freshman year is not very common at all. He played fine. It's just compared to his freshman season, he might not have been as flashy. I do personally think that Sony Michel will be a better back at the next level. However, I disagree that they both underperformed.
Also, I think injuries plagued our running game a lot with Sony Michel breaking his wrist, I believe, a little bit of the year. And, Chubb with his very big knee injury versus Tennessee last year still kind of hurting him a lot this year. So.
And also, I do want to add, I think Eason was hurt a lot by his receivers last year, as Alex mentioned. There were some passes that should have been caught that were dropped and really killed the offense as a whole. And sometimes that can kill a QB's confidence as well when you feel like you're in a rhythm and you're throwing good balls and you see them just falling out of guys' hands consistently. Who do I trust to give the ball to? And it hurts several things. But I do want to move on from the Eason argument. We all think Eason's talented. We all think he's capable. It's just, can everybody around him help him reach that potential? He's 18 years old, or probably 19 at this point. It's way too early to call him a bust. But I do want to move on to UGA's biggest games of the year. And I know AJ and Blake have opinions on that. And Alex, if you want to chime in on that later as well, you can. But talk to me about UGA's biggest games of the year.
Well, I think some of our biggest games are Notre Dame, Tennessee, Florida, Auburn, Kentucky, and Georgia Tech, obviously. I think Notre Dame is going to be our kind of coming out party. I do think the game beforehand, Appalachian State, they will give us, a run for our money. But I think Notre Dame it'll be on NBC, so it's on a national level. And I think we're really going to show that Georgia may or may not have it depending on what happens versus Notre Dame. What do you think, AJ?
Well, I do agree with some of your options, but you picked like half of our games on the schedule as our biggest games. So I'll kind of narrow the list down a little bit to just Florida, Auburn, and Notre Dame. And of course, Georgia Tech and any other rivalry game is an important game. But when I look at this, I look at how this can impact UGA season the most if they win or lose. So if we beat Florida, Auburn, and Notre Dame, and we take care of business with everyone else, lose maybe one or two games, we're in the SEC championship. But say you lose to Florida, beat Auburn, lose to Notre Dame, your season is over, basically. You're not going to the SEC championship at that point. I do agree with the fact that Notre Dame will be kind of a coming out party. I do think Georgia's really going to bring it, but it'll also depend on how App State fares as well. And we've talked about this. If App State keeps it close and it's a hard-fought game, I feel like confidence will be a little low and the team will be tired when they go up to South Bend. But if we do what we should do against App State, I think that Notre Dame game could be very exciting to watch, for sure.
And I wanted to jump into what in our opinions, is our biggest game of the year, and that's the Florida-Georgia game on October 28th. I basically think, depending on how each of our schedules go, this Florida-Georgia game is basically to determine who wins the East and faces basically Alabama in the SEC championship.
Well, I do agree with that because it doesn't seem like Tennessee is going to really do anything special. This is definitely a transition year. You're losing Josh Dawes. You've lost a lot of talent to the NFL. However, it always seems like no matter how bad Florida is or no matter how good Georgia is on paper or even going into the game, we just can never pull it out. And I think if we do win this game, that'll be a big indicator as to how strong and tough this team is. But if we lose, it'll just be another season lost.
Yeah, AJ, I will have to agree with you on that one. Of course, it's kind of like with Alabama and Auburn, just throw the records out the window, especially with the Georgia-Florida game. But I kind of wanted to talk about trap games because, really, the only two teams in the East that I see contending this year are Georgia and Florida. But for the trap games, really, they're both in the month of November with South Carolina and Kentucky. I know both games are at home in Athens, but South Carolina is a very underrated team, especially with Jake Bentley at the helm, and Debo Samuels is a major key in that game. He's a major X factor in the SEC. At that, Kentucky, I think it's Steven or Stephen Johnson or whoever's the quarterback up there. He's an underrated quarterback, but especially in the month of November, as an Auburn fan, I've seen collapses in 2014 and then 2016. I've just seen November collapses. And usually in the month of November, that's when guys start to lose their legs. They start getting tired. They start getting banged up. And so, especially against South Carolina and Kentucky, and right sandwiched in between South Carolina and Kentucky is the Deep South's oldest rivalry against Auburn in Auburn. So, I mean, be on the lookout for those 3 games in particular, but especially South Carolina and Kentucky, since those could be potential track games in the month of November.
Okay.
All right, so now that you guys have talked about UGA's biggest games, I do want to propose one final question before we move on to Georgia Tech, and that's a question or more of an observation I have about Kirby Smart and his hiring. Now, we all know Kirby Smart was a very much beloved, I guess you could say, defensive coordinator at Alabama. And when he was leaving Alabama, he was one of the hottest names on the coaching free agent market. A lot of teams wanted this guy, in Georgia, I guess you could say, lucked out. But one thing I've always wondered about Kirby was, did he get this high-profile job too quickly? And I do want to mention 2 more recent names that moved on to high-profile jobs. Tom Herman, who's now at Texas, and Jim McElwain, who is at Florida. We saw both these guys go from coordinator positions and then go on to Tom Herman came from Ohio State, went to Houston, and you have Jim McElwain, who was the offensive coordinator at Alabama and went on to Colorado State for a couple years before they got this higher profile job, which by the time they were at these jobs, they had experience, they knew what they were doing, and it wasn't something brand new to them. This head coaching job is brand new to Kirby, and we did see several of those issues arise. One of the most major and notable issues was his time management skills, and this his inability to win games against opponents he should have beat, like Vanderbilt and maybe even Georgia Tech, and struggling games against teams like Nicholls State, which shouldn't have happened at all, and I think we all know that by now. So I do want to ask this question to UGA fans. Was this job awarded to Kirby too quickly?
I don't think so, and here's why. You can look on paper and say, yes, he was awarded it too quickly, but if you look at the state of former Alabama coaches, Dabo Swinney, Jim McElwain, and even Kirby, who, in my opinion, is a very hated-on coach when he shouldn't be. 8-5 is not a bad season, like by any means, and especially for a first-year coach. And like you said before in the show, this coaching staff is very inexperienced, I guess you could say. There's definitely some nicks to work out, but when you look at the state of college football, expectations are at its highest, and that's really due to fan expectations and as well as school boards. They want to win, and they want to win fast, and they're looking at the success of all these other former Alabama coaches, and they're saying, well, if we can get the most accomplished of Nick Saban's proteges, I guess, then we can start winning now. And I guess we're on the track of that, and I can see why they made that decision. But I do think it was the right decision at the same time. I think you got to give him time. And like you said, time management, that's something he can develop. It's something he can learn. And I think you got to give him a little more time to develop those coaching skills.
I'm going to agree with AJ here, where it was I don't think he was rushed. I just think you need to give him a little bit more time to, develop his coaching skills, and as well as the team. I think the team, considering that Kirby went in and he kind of redid the coaching staff top to bottom, I think it was I think everybody has to get used to coaching together and, the players playing for these coaches. And I think 2017, 2018, 2019, I think we're going to start to become maybe even a national championship contender. But as of now, I think we just need to give these guys time. Kirby Smart especially his time management skills. We saw that was pretty rough on him the entire year, but he can develop that with time.
And Alex, do you have anything to add?
For Kirby, I don't think he was rushed at all. I think he was a very, very good assistant under Nick Saban. I mean, it's probably as good as you can get. I mean, he had multiple job offers during his tenure at Alabama, and just considering that he's an alumni and he's a Georgia boy, I think it was a very, very good hire. And people just this is a topic that we could discuss later in another video for another day, because there's a time and place for everything. But it's a wide ranging topic universally in the world of sports. Is just unrealistic expectations for guys in their first years at like top schools or top teams, you know. For Kirby, I think 8-5 was a very, I won't say a very good year, because sometimes in the SEC, 8 wins isn't going to get it done. But at the same time, with what he had, he did a very, very good job in his first year, and especially in recruiting. He basically put a gate in a wall around the state of Georgia, and in Athens. He kept a lot of the top guys, a lot of the top high schoolers in the state of Georgia coming into Athens, and the talent there it's very deep, and at the same time it's very raw. But that's what coaches are there to do. That's their job, is to develop their guys, to get them into top shape, get them developed right, and to contend for SEC and national championships. And so I think Kirby can do that. You just got to give it time.
And I did want to point out, I don't think it was necessarily the 8-5 record that bothered a lot of UGA fans. I think it was more of where some of those losses came from, as I pointed out. I think UGA fans typically expect a win against Vanderbilt and Georgia Tech, which are 2 losses they suffered in the same year. And I think that really rubbed many UGA fans the wrong way. But that's I think we've all given a pretty fair take on Kirby. I never thought personally Kirby was a bad coach, but you do hear he's kind of polarizing between UGA fans at this point. But I do think a coach should get 3 to 4 seasons, especially in college football, to build his program up, to get his culture built up and his coaching staff built up before we start saying this guy's a hit or miss. But speaking on Georgia Tech, I think it's time to transition to them because it was also the last regular season game UGA played, and Georgia Tech did win that game last year. I don't remember the score, I'm sorry, but
28-27.
28-27, thank you. So I do want to move on to Georgia Tech. I'm personally a Georgia Tech fan, so I do have my information ready to say. Georgia Tech, they are suffering some important losses from their offense, and Justin Thomas and Marcus Marshall, who transferred to Wake Forest, I believe, and Justin Thomas just graduated. He moved on. On defense, they're losing guys like Patrick Gamble, who provided 10.5 tackles for losses and 7.5 sacks last year. They're also losing P.J. Davis, who moved on to the NFL, which that's ultimately going to hurt the team, especially when you lose leaders and guys that provided that type of impact. But I do want to speak on a guy who I don't think is being spoken on enough, at least from the casual fans. I can't speak, guys. I'm sorry, but Dedrick Mills. I don't think Dedrick Mills is being talked about enough. He's a B-back for Georgia Tech last year. In just 9 games, he rushed for over 700 yards and had 12 touchdowns. And I mentioned he only played 9 games. He missed 3 games due to suspension and 1 game due to injury, which is unfortunate. And the issue with Dedrick has never been his ability or even his health, but it's also always been his attitude, which Paul Johnson spoke on at one point last year. If Dedrick can't get it together, he's not going to be a Georgia Tech player. And I think Paul Johnson has built up this reputation for being a pretty strict guy when it comes to his players. So the fact that he suspended Dedrick Mills and let him back on the team in the first place is pretty impressive and speaks to how much Paul Johnson may like this guy. But Georgia, and I did mention Georgia Tech also lost Justin Thomas. That's obviously going to hurt. Justin Thomas was probably the best quarterback Paul Johnson ever had in his tenure at Georgia Tech, and he had Josh Nesbitt to start off, and then he moved to Tevin Washington, which was a failed couple seasons for Georgia Tech. And then they moved on to Vad Lee, who was a 4-star recruit and was just expected to lead Georgia Tech to that next level. That didn't work out, and Vad Lee ended up transferring to James Madison University and doing okay things over there, and eventually moved on to CFL and so on and so forth. And then they moved on to Justin Thomas, who provided a pretty spectacular 3 years for Georgia Tech, beating UGA twice in Athens during that time span. And so now they're moving on to Matthew Jordan, who started last year against Virginia Tech, went to Virginia Tech on a road game, beat them his very first start for Georgia Tech. Not his first time playing. He had played previous seasons and goal line stances. Paul Johnson would put him in there because he's a big body and he's able to get in the end zone. The issue with Jordan has never necessarily been his ability to run the triple option offense or run, period. It's been his ability to throw the football, which we saw him struggle with in a major way against Virginia Tech at times last year. He would just put the ball up there, it would kind of float in the air, and I do believe he threw an interception. But I'm excited for Georgia Tech this season. I think they have very many winnable games on their schedule. They open up with Tennessee, which I think they can beat Tennessee. And if they do beat Tennessee, I think that will set quite the tone for the season, especially with the win over SEC opponent, which everybody always loves to talk about SEC. And they also have other games against Miami, a game they need to win. Obviously, ACC opponent, Clemson, UNC, Virginia, Duke, so on. But my expectations for Tech this season, they're not high, but they're not low, because as a Georgia Tech fan, I've never known what to expect from them, because sometimes you expect them to win 7-8 games, and then they go 11-2 and go to an Orange Bowl, which has happened twice under Paul Johnson. Nobody expected those seasons. I think if any year that kind of season could happen again, though, I do think it could be this year. I like the talent they have on offense. As I mentioned, I like Jordan. I like Mills. They have Ricky June at wide receiver. They also have Quay Cersei on offense. And I like some of the talent they have on defense as well. Brant Mitchell, the Austin brothers, Lance and Lawrence, who both had 3 interceptions last year each. And Brant Mitchell, the linebacker, he's a pretty talented kid. He really hit his stride towards the last half of the season, getting, I believe, over 45 tackles over like the last 7 or 5 games. He had an interception against UGA, I believe. So overall, that's what I have to say about Georgia Tech. If anybody has anything else to add, I'm welcome to hear it.
I did want to add that they do have some of their biggest offensive stars back, like Dietrich Mills and Ricky June. In total, they have 8 offensive starters back, so I think that's going to help their cause this year a lot. So,
yeah, and obviously one thing that's important with Georgia Tech is continuity on offense, because the triple option on offense, or whatever some people want to call it, a flex bone, whatever you want to call it, it really depends on chemistry between quarterbacks and his running backs and his fullbacks and even his wide receivers, because everything is instinct. You see the incoming, you toss it, or the QB keeps it. It's all about instinct and chemistry and knowing to trust your guy to catch that ball. We saw many times with Justin Thomas, when Georgia Tech won 3 games that season, there was a lot of new guys on that offense, and Justin Thomas loves to toss the ball at the last minute. We saw a lot of fumbles. And we even saw that last year at points when Justin Thomas, he expected the guy to be there. He wasn't there, and it was a fumble. That can't necessarily happen, because a fumble in a triple option offense, especially when you toss it and nobody's there, that's an easy pickup for a guy just to swipe it and go run into the end zone. That happened against Miami last year when I think their defense scored 3 touchdowns and Georgia Tech's offense only scored 1 touchdown. That you can't have games like that, especially when you're playing teams like Tennessee and UGA and Miami again. Stuff like that can't happen. But as far as how many wins I expect Tech to get, I think they'll win around 9 games. I think they have the potential to win 11, as any team has the potential to have a big year. But Georgia Tech isn't a team that's going to be on the national radar, and they never are. And nobody ever expects them to become a ranked team. And when they do, everybody's like, "Oh my goodness, Tech is ranked team. Where did that come from? So that's all I have to say about Georgia Tech. I know it was a lot, and I know I was really the only person to talk. But if anybody else has anything to add, does anybody else have anything to add? No? So I'm going to move on to Georgia Southern, where the offense of the running backs coach from Georgia Tech went. So, Blake, do you have anything to say about Georgia Southern?
Yes, Brian Cook, the offensive coordinator for Georgia Southern, said he wants his offense to look somewhat like Georgia Tech, kind of like that flex bone where you run the triple option, under center, basically. But during spring practice, nobody really saw him do that. They saw him do the normal 2015 type triple option that Georgia Southern did, where they led the entire nation in rushing, where they ran the option from the shotgun position. And they have a lot of big games this year, including one against Auburn, which I believe is the opening game. So, speaking from an Auburn fan, Alex, would you like to say anything about that game?
Yeah, like you said, Southern, they're basically moving back to their roots. I mean, the triple option, the flex bone. The high school that I went to, we ran a variation of it. We were more a power running team out of the flex bone and more of a wing T type of team out of the flex bone. But that offense can cause so many problems for a defense. No matter what level you play at, no matter what conference, what division you play at, it causes so many problems, and it forces you to play assignment football. Because you have so much going on in the backfield with different types of motions, and if you get in the power running game, different types of pulling guards and tackles getting the second level, and just a bunch of that stuff, and a bunch of eye candy almost and misdirection. So I think it's a very, very smart move for Georgia Southern to go back to its roots, back to the flex bone triple option offense, and against Auburn, I'm really not expecting that much from Georgia Southern. I mean, because with the way Auburn's defense is coming back with Derek Brown and Marlon Davidson and Jeff Holland and a freshman, Big Cat Bryant, that just got on campus over the spring. I think that defense is going to be very, very stout for Auburn and very tough to move the ball on, especially in the first week when you're implementing that type of offense in a real live game situation. So I think going forward for Georgia Southern, I think the game that you really need to key in on to see what Georgia Southern might be like is New Hampshire, because I believe New Hampshire is still a 1AA school or FCS school, whatever you would have it. But that would probably be the game to key in on to see, hey, what are we going to expect from Georgia Southern with the offense? Will the triple option actually work? Then they have a bye week, and then they go to Indiana, and that should be an interesting game because it's a Power 5 school. And then they have another off week, and then boom, they're right into their conference schedule against Arkansas State in Statesboro on a Wednesday night, nonetheless. So going forward for Georgia Southern, it's just getting back to their roots and just don't go 5-7 again under Tyson Summers. I know it was a very, very tumultuous season in Statesboro last year, especially down the stretch where they lost, I believe, like maybe 4 or 5 straight games, and they got it together against Troy in the very last game against the Trojans for a 28-24 win that basically saved Tyson Summers' job almost. But just going forward for Georgia Southern, just get back to your roots and start showing a bit of progress.
I wanted to bring back up the Auburn game. Georgia Southern really does have a history with keeping close to the SEC teams, especially Georgia. We all remember the Georgia game in 2015 where they almost took them to overtime. Ole Miss last year, they almost won, and they actually beat Florida in 2013. So I think most Southern fans aren't really looking to win that first game of the year against Auburn. I think most Southern fans would be really just proud that they even kept it close with some team of like that capacity. Moving on, I wanted to go on to their returners. They have 6 starting offensive players back, 5 defensive players back, and 3 special teams players back. Some of those big guys are Wesley Fields, who is running back, wide receiver Miles Campbell, and defensive back Joshua Moon. But they did lose some of their big guys, like quarterback Kevin Ellison. Sorry about this if I butchered this. Linebacker Ukeme Elegwe. Sorry if I butchered that. And kicker Young Ho Koo. So I expect a decent season from Georgia Southern, but I'm not going to expect anything great. My expectations are pretty low this year.
And to add on to that about Georgia Southern, obviously they're transitioning back to this triple option offense. I don't know how much experience the kids on this offense right now have in the triple option. I know they ran some variation of an option last year, but it wasn't a full triple option. That can be a very difficult offense to learn and to get everything going. And starting off against Auburn in a talented defense like that, it might stunt their growth in that offense. If you think about it, if they can't get things going, it might hurt confidence. It probably would have been better if they had a easier opponent on their schedule so they could get things going. I think if they can't get things going against Auburn and keep it as a competitive game, it could really hurt them. The first game of a season can really mold or shape the way a team plays down the stretch. Obviously, not all the time, but when you're trying something new completely and you lose that first game, that can really be, it can be hard on a squad. But I think we've covered Georgia Southern pretty fairly and evenly, so we're going to move on to Georgia State. And I know Alex has some stuff to say about Georgia State, so Alex, you can take it.
Yeah, for Georgia State this year coming into 2017, it's basically a whole new era for Georgia State football. I mean, they're basically pressing the reset button. They're moving into Turner Field. I believe it's now going to be called Georgia State Stadium or something like that to that effect. But it's basically done. They've put bleachers into what was right center and center field there at Turner Field. But they also have a new head coach in Sean Elliott. If you don't know who Sean Elliott is, he was a longtime assistant at Appalachian State during the golden ages when they were just completely dominating the 1AA FCS level, along with Georgia Southern at that time too. They were kind of the top two teams, especially in the SoCon, I believe. That was the conference that they were in. At the 1AA level, but a long-time App State assistant. Then in 2010, he was hired as the offensive line coach and run game coordinator at South Carolina with Steve Spurrier, and then he was promoted to co-offensive coordinator in 2012 for the Gamecocks, and he served in that position till 2015. And in 2015, he was actually the interim head coach. So he does have a little bit of head coaching experience, albeit for around, I believe it was, the last 6 games of the year in 2015 for South Carolina after Steve Spurrier resigned and effectively retired. And then once Will Muschamp came in, Muschamp decided to retain Sean Elliott as the offensive line coach. And then in the offseason in December, Sean Elliott was announced as the head coach at Georgia State, among others. Rhett Lashley, I believe, interviewed for that job. He was the former offensive coordinator at Auburn. He's moved on to UConn now, but that's besides the point. But he has hired as his offensive coordinator a familiar name in coaching circles around college football and even in pop culture now, Travis Trickett. If that name sounds familiar to you, it is because Travis Trickett is the older brother of Clint Trickett, who is now the offensive coordinator he's not the offensive coordinator. He's on the offensive staff at Florida Atlantic, where Travis Trickett was previously in 2016. But a little bit of history on Travis Trickett. He was a graduate assistant coach at West Virginia during the Rich Rod era, from 2003 to 2007. Then he moved on to Alabama under Nick Saban his first 2 years, 07-08. Then he was with his dad at Florida State. His dad is the offensive line coach at Florida State. He was there as basically as a graduate assistant at GA from 2009 to 2010. He then moved to Samford University, Sam, not Stan, Samford University in Birmingham at the 1AA level. He worked under Rhett Lashley. He was an assistant coach. He was the tight ends coach. And then after Rhett left, he was promoted to the offensive coordinator and QB position once Chris Hatcher came in. And then, of course, last year he was at Florida Atlantic. And that offense, it's kind of a hybrid between what Auburn does and kind of an air raid offense. So what I would expect from Georgia State's offense is a very up-tempo system, but also that tries to balance the run and the pass within the spread that can use a power running game a little bit. But while he was at Samford had one of the top offenses in 1AA and in the SoCon, the Southern Conference in 1AA. So I mean, it's a very, very good hire for Sean Elliott and Georgia State. It allows them to have a certain identity that they want to play fast, they want to play physical out of the spread and shotgun. And then for their defensive coordinator, they hired Nate Fuqua. He goes by Nate, I believe. And Nate Fuqua he's been the defense coordinator for Wofford, who is a 1AA school. He's been there for the last 3 seasons as the defense coordinator, but he's also coached the linebackers, or the outside linebackers, and he'll coach that at Georgia State, apparently. But the system that he runs is a 3-4 system, similar to what Alabama runs and what Georgia runs. So he's going to run a 3-4. And the Terriers up at Wofford last year, they had the nation's number 5 defense in 1AA, just giving up 287 yards per game and just 4.6 yards per play, again, in that 3-4 defense. And it's a very hard defense to learn in year one, but it also allows for a lot of versatility and a lot of multiple fronts and an odd front defense that a 3-4 defense can present. So, I mean, I really don't have any information on the players, but that's just what you can expect from Georgia State, is to run a up-tempo shotgun spread offense and a 3-4 defense.
One thing I want to add on, I would just kind of want to talk about Sean Elliott for a second, because I really like the hire of Sean Elliott, actually. We were talking about this before the show, and Sean Elliott really just has this fire about him. When he took over as interim coach at South Carolina, that team was completely devoid of talent because Steve Spurrier had pretty much checked out at that point, and he did everything he could with that team, and he really sparked them. They didn't really win any games under him, but he really gave them a spark mentally, at least.
Yeah, I have to agree, AJ. I mean, he's only, 44 years old, so he's on the younger side of coaching, and his best years are yet to come. But I totally agree. He brings a lot of fire, a lot of passion for football, and he's going to light a fire under Georgia State, excuse me. But he's very passionate, very high energy, and a guy that if I was a college recruit and if he was recruiting me, I wouldn't mind playing for him, because the feeling I get from Sean Elliott is that, yeah, he might not be the greatest tactical coach, not the greatest schemer, but he'll by the time you graduate, you'll probably want to run through a wall for Sean Elliott, and I think he's going to bring a lot of fire and a lot of passion, a lot of high energy in Atlanta, especially going into this new era of Georgia State football.
Yeah, I definitely got to admit, as a Georgia State fan, I mean, I know none of us are Georgia State fans, but any State fans that are listening, you got to be at least a little bit excited for all this change that's coming. I mean, you got Turner Field being converted into a football stadium, and based on the pictures I've seen, it actually looks really cool. I'm not going to lie. And you got Sean Elliott, who's a pretty nice coach. And in general, they had a lot of big-name guys in their coaching search. I mean, they interviewed Mel Tucker, who is the defensive coordinator for Georgia. They interviewed him for the job, but he obviously wasn't chosen. So Georgia State's definitely picking up the pace and getting really serious with this.
Yeah, agreed. If I was a Georgia State fan, I'd be pretty excited for this new era.
So I do think that covers all the teams that at least we're covering. Obviously, there's many more college football teams in Georgia, but unless anybody has anything else to add, I think we're gonna wrap this up. So, is everybody good on their opinions and their takes and everything?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I'm just excited for kickoff. Let's get it going.
Yeah. How far away is the kickoff day for the first game?
Oh man, it's like
3
30 something days.
I
Yeah,
want to say a little bit over 30 days, 35, 34 days, something like that.
I think it's less than that. It might be 30. To be totally honest with you.
I know a month from today is when UGA kicks off, but I don't know about
Yeah.
anybody else.
All right, so obviously that's all we have to say about UGA, Georgia Tech, Georgia State, and Georgia Southern. Thank you all for listening, and make sure you check out the other videos on our YouTube channel. We would appreciate that, and if you want to share it with friends or family members, you can do that as well. We certainly will share this with people that we know because we want people to hear what we have to say. But thank you for listening. Make sure you check out the social media in the description. We have a Twitter and we have an Instagram that we post on pretty consistently. So thank you all for listening again. I'm Nicholas Coley, and I did this with AJ Merritt, Alex Driscoll, and Blake Henderson. And we hope you all have a great day.